Nobody clocks into a Tuesday night diner shift expecting it to be their last. You worry about spilled coffee, stiff tips, and whether the fryer grease needs changing. You certainly don't expect a massive, bloodied cane corso to drag itself through the front door, followed by three armed men looking to finish the job. Jade never asked to be a hero. She just couldn't stand by and watch a helpless animal be slaughtered on her freshly mopped linoleum. 5 stab wounds later, she was bleeding out on the tiles. But the real shock didn't come from the near-death experience. It came the next morning, when 20 men in tailored suits locked down the intensive care unit, standing guard at her door. The rain was coming down in sheets across the south side of Chicago, drumming a relentless rhythm against the grease-stained windows of O'Malley's diner. It was 2:15 a.m. Jade Jenkins, 24, exhausted, and running on 3 hours of sleep, was wiping down the counter for the 4th time. The diner was empty save for Old Man Henderson snoring in booth 3 and the hum of the neon open sign flickering above the door. Jade was a girl who kept her head down. Between paying off her mother's medical debts and keeping her younger sister, Lily, in a decent school, she didn't have the luxury of inviting trouble. She lived by a simple rule: mind your business, serve the pie, and go home. That rule shattered the moment the front door chimed. It wasn't a customer, it was a dog. But dog felt like an inadequate word for the beast that limped into the harsh fluorescent light. It was a cane corso, easily weighing over 130 pounds, with a coat the color of wet coal. It was wearing a thick leather collar adorned with custom silver hardware, but more pressingly, it was bleeding. A deep gash ran along its hind leg, and it was panting heavily, leaving a trail of dark crimson on Jade's freshly mopped floor. "Hey, buddy," Jade whispered, stepping out from behind the counter. She had a soft spot for animals. She volunteered at the West Side Rescue on weekends. She grabbed a clean bar towel and slowly approached the massive animal. The dog didn't growl. It just looked at her with intelligent, amber eyes that seemed entirely too human before collapsing near the jukebox. Jade dropped to her knees, pressing the towel against the wound. "It's okay. I've got you," she murmured. Before she could even reach for her phone to call animal control, the front door burst open, slamming violently against the wall. 3 men walked in. They weren't street punks looking to empty the cash register. They wore dark leather jackets over expensive clothes, their expressions cold and rigid. Jade recognized the type immediately. This neighborhood was heavily taxed by the local syndicates. The man in the center, a wiry guy with a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow, known on the streets as Ricky Razor Silva, a mid-level enforcer for the Petrov family, stepped forward. "Look what we have here, boys," Ricky sneered, pulling a 6-inch serrated hunting knife from his belt. The mutt ran to get a burger. The dog, despite its injury, tried to stand, letting out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the floorboards. "Hey, you can't be in here with that," Jade said, her voice shaking but her body instinctively shifting to block the dog. "Move, sweetheart," Ricky said, his eyes dead and unfeeling. "That beast belongs to Bernard Costello. Boss wants its head in a box on Costello's doorstep by 3 a.m. It's business. You don't want to be in the middle of business." Bernard Costello. The name sent a chill down Jade's spine. He was the head of the Costello Syndicate, the most ruthless and powerful organized crime family in the city. The Petrovs and the Costellos had been in a bloody turf war for 6 months. "I don't care who it belongs to," Jade said, her grip tightening on the bloody towel. "It's an injured animal. You're not touching him." Ricky laughed, a dry, humorless sound. He nodded to his 2 men. "Grab the waitress. I'll finish the dog." The 2 thugs lunged. Jade didn't think. Survival instinct and blind adrenaline took over. As one man grabbed her arm, she swung her heavy, industrial-grade flashlight, catching him squarely in the jaw with a sickening crack. He stumbled back, cursing. Ricky's eyes flashed with sudden rage. "Stupid bitch." He lunged past her, aiming the knife at the dog's neck. Jade threw herself backward, intercepting the strike. The first blade plunged into her left shoulder. She screamed, the sound tearing through the quiet diner. Old Man Henderson woke up, took one look at the blood, and scrambled out the back emergency exit. The dog snapped its jaws, catching Ricky's wrist and crushing it with a wet crunch. Ricky howled, dropping the knife, but his left hand drew a smaller switchblade. Blinded by pain and fury, he began wildly stabbing at whatever was in front of him. Jade took the hits meant for the animal, 2 in the abdomen, 1 grazing her ribs. The final, deepest thrust caught her just beneath the collarbone. She collapsed, the cold linoleum rushing up to meet her cheek. The world tilted and spun. The last thing she heard before the thugs scrambled out the door, spooked by approaching sirens, was the frantic, protective barking of the dog standing directly over her body. Pain is a strange thing. When there's enough of it, the brain simply refuses to process it all at once, turning absolute agony into a cold, spreading numbness. Jade lay on the floor of O'Malley's, her vision swimming in dark, fuzzy halos. She could feel the warmth of her own blood pooling beneath her back, soaking through her cheap pink uniform. Her breathing was shallow, every inhale sending a sharp, electrical shock of fire through her chest and stomach. I can't die, she thought weakly, the image of her sister Lily flashing in her mind. Who is going to pay the rent? Who is going to make sure Lily graduates? A heavy, warm weight settled next to her. The cane Corso, bleeding heavily itself, had laid down completely flush against her side. Its massive head rested gently on her uninjured shoulder. It let out a soft, distressed whine, and a rough, warm tongue licked the cold sweat from Jade's cheek. The beast, trained for war and intimidation, was trying to comfort her. Good boy, Jade choked out, tasting copper in her mouth. Her eyes fluttered shut. The wail of the sirens grew deafening. Heavy boots pounded against the diner floor. Jesus Christ. Dispatch, we have a multi-casualty situation. Civilian female down, multiple stab wounds. We need an RA unit yesterday. Officer Brian Gallagher's voice echoed from 1,000 miles away. Paramedics rushed in. Jade felt hands pressing down hard on her stomach. The pain spiked, tearing a ragged gasp from her throat. Pressure. Keep pressure on the abdominal wounds. She's tachycardic. BP is dropping fast. We're losing her. The dog won't move, one of the EMTs shouted. Jade forced her eyes open a sliver. The cane Corso was standing over her again, baring its teeth at the paramedics, refusing to let them near her torso. It wasn't being aggressive. It was guarding its savior. Don't hurt him, Jade whispered, her voice barely a breath. She weakly reached up, her bloody fingers grazing the dog's jaw. Let them. It's okay, buddy. As if understanding her completely, the massive dog backed off, sitting just 2 feet away, its amber eyes tracking every movement the paramedics made. The next few hours were a chaotic blur of flashing red and blue lights, the sterile, blinding whites of the Mercy General emergency room, and the frantic shouting of surgeons. Jade remembered the feeling of her clothes being cut away, the freezing wipe of iodine, and the mask slipping over her face before the dark, heavy curtain of anesthesia finally pulled her under. When she woke, she didn't know if it was hours or days later. The rhythmic, steady beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor was the first thing she registered. She tried to move her arm, but it felt like it was encased in lead. Her entire torso throbbed with a dull, insistent ache, tightly bound in layers of gauze and surgical tape. She blinked against the harsh lighting, realizing she was in a private ICU room. It was stark, smelling of bleach and antiseptic. You're awake. Jade jumped slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at her stitches. A woman in a white coat was standing at the foot of her bed. Her name badge read, Dr. Sarah Higgins, Chief of Trauma. Try not to move, Jade, doctor. Higgins said, her voice gentle but professional. You took a severe beating, 5 puncture wounds. 1 narrowly missed your left lung, and another nicked your liver. You've been in surgery for 6 hours and unconscious for another 14. Jade swallowed hard, her throat feeling like sandpaper. The dog? Dr. Higgins paused, a strange, almost nervous look crossing her face. The dog was treated by a private veterinary team. He's fine. Jade, the police were here. They wanted a statement, but... The doctor hesitated, looking toward the heavy wooden door of the ICU room. The situation has become highly complicated. Complicated? Jade rasped. I was just doing my job. Some guys came in to herd a stray. He wasn't a stray, Jade, Dr. Higgins said quietly, stepping closer. And the men who came in weren't just street thugs. The police have been ordered to stand down for the moment. The floor has been taken over. Before Jade could ask what on earth she meant, a heavy, rhythmic knocking echoed from the door. The door didn't just open. It was pushed open with an air of absolute authority. The first thing Jade noticed was the absolute silence that fell over the usually bustling hospital corridor outside. The second thing was the sheer size of the men who stepped into the room. Two men, built like offensive linemen, stepped inside. They weren't wearing the cheap leather jackets of the thugs from the diner. They were dressed in immaculate, custom-tailored Brioni suits, their ties perfectly knotted, their postures rigid, earpieces curled behind their necks. They did not speak. They simply took positions on either side of the door, scanning the room with cold, professional efficiency. Dr. Higgins stepped back, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked terrified. Then, he walked in. Bernard Costello did not look like the monsters from the movies. He didn't have slicked back hair or a cigar hanging from his mouth. He looked entirely, lethally sophisticated. He was in his early 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp, aristocratic features and dark hair styled with casual precision. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that probably cost more than Jade made in 5 years. But it was his eyes that caught her off guard. They were a striking, piercing gray, and right now, they were fixed entirely on her. "Doctor, you may leave," Bernard said. His voice was deep, smooth, and carried a quiet power that didn't require him to raise it. Dr. Higgins nodded quickly and practically bolted from the room, leaving Jade alone with 3 very dangerous men. Who are you?" Jade asked, her heart monitor picking up speed, the beep 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 betraying her panic. Bernard didn't answer immediately. He approached her bed with slow, measured steps. He looked down at her pale face, the dark circles under her eyes, and the heavy bandages visible beneath her hospital gown, a muscle feathered in his jaw. He raised a hand, and one of the bodyguards immediately pulled up a chair. Bernard sat down, leaning his forearms on his knees, bringing him closer to her eye level. "My name is Bernard Costello," he said quietly. Jade's breath hitched. The name from the diner. The boss. "I am aware," Bernard continued, his gray eyes searching hers, "that you know who I am. I also know that Ricky Silva, a dead man walking who currently works for the Petrovs, entered your diner last night. He was there to kill a member of my family to send a message." He snapped his fingers. The door opened again, and a third suited man walked in, holding a heavy leather leash. At the end of it was the cane Corso. The dog's hind leg was heavily bandaged, but the moment it saw Jade, its ears perked up. It pulled against the handler, letting out a soft, eager whine. "Let him go," Bernard ordered. The handler unclipped the leash. The massive dog trotted over to the side of Jade's bed, gently resting its heavy chin on the mattress, right near her uninjured hand. Jade let out a shaky breath, instinct taking over as her fingers buried themselves in the dog's thick fur. "His name is Nero," Bernard said, watching the interaction with an unreadable expression. "He is my shadow. He was ambushed during a drop-off gone wrong. He ran. He survived because of you. I just like dogs," Jade whispered, feeling entirely out of her depth. "They were going to kill him." "Yes, they were," Bernard agreed, his voice dropping an octave, a dangerous edge bleeding into his smooth tone. "And you, a civilian, a waitress making minimum wage, threw yourself between a Petrov enforcer's blade and my dog. You took 5 stab wounds for an animal that isn't yours." Jade didn't know what to say. Put like that, it sounded insane. I couldn't just watch. Bernard stood up slowly. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a sleek, black business card, setting it gently on the table beside her bed. "The hospital wing is secured. I have 20 of my best men stationed from the lobby to the roof. Nobody gets off the elevator without my permission. The police will not bother you. The hospital bills are paid. The Petrovs," Bernard paused, a chillingly calm smile touching his lips. "The Petrovs are currently having a very bad morning. Ricky Silva will not be an issue for you ever again." Jade stared at him, her mind spinning. "You didn't have to do that. I don't want any trouble. I just want to heal and go home to my sister." Bernard's eyes softened just a fraction. He reached out, his knuckles brushing lightly against the edge of her blanket in a surprisingly gentle gesture. "You misunderstand the situation, Miss Jenkins," Bernard said softly. "In my world, a debt of blood is the heaviest burden a man can carry. You bled for mine. That makes you mine to protect." He turned and walked toward the door, pausing just as he crossed the threshold. "Rest, Jade. When you are discharged, my men will escort you home. We have much more to discuss." The door clicked shut, leaving Jade alone in the sterile room, the heavy weight of the cane Corso's head on her hand, and the terrifying realization that her simple, quiet life was over. The hospital ceiling became Jade's entire universe for the next 8 days. True to Bernard Costello's word, the intensive care unit was transformed into a fortress. Nurses were vetted before entering. Doctors were escorted by broad-shouldered men with earpieces. The police came exactly once, spoke briefly to a lawyer in a custom Brioni suit who materialized out of thin air, and promptly left, never to return. Jade's physical recovery was agonizing. The stab wounds were healing, but every cough felt like a hot iron pressed against her ribs. Yet, the physical pain was secondary to the gnawing anxiety eating at her sanity. She was a waitress from the South Side. She worried about utility bills and the price of eggs, not mob wars and blood debts. On the morning of her discharge, Dr. Higgins signed her paperwork with trembling hands, avoiding eye contact with the two men standing guard inside the room. One of them, a towering man with a thick beard and a surprisingly gentle demeanor, stepped forward. "Miss Jenkins." "My name is Dante," he said, his voice a deep baritone rumbling in his chest. "Mr. Costello has sent us to ensure you get home safely." "I can call a cab, Dante," Jade said, pulling her worn denim jacket over her fresh bandages, wincing as the fabric snagged. "I appreciate the intense security, but it's really not necessary." Dante didn't smile, but a flicker of amusement danced in his dark eyes. "With respect, ma'am, a cab isn't going to cut it. Not today." When Jade stepped out of the hospital, sliding doors into the crisp Chicago morning, she understood why. A line of 3 black, armored Cadillac Escalades idled at the curb. 6 men in dark suits stood strategically around the vehicles, their eyes scanning the street with predatory focus. Jade felt the heavy weight of stares from passing pedestrians and hospital staff. She ducked her head, her cheeks burning, and allowed Dante to guide her into the cavernous back seat of the middle SUV. The interior smelled of rich leather and expensive cologne. To her surprise, the seat next to her was already occupied by a massive, shadowy figure, Nero. The cane Corso let out a joyous, rumbling whine the moment she closed the door. He shifted his heavy body, resting his large head securely on her lap, careful to avoid her bandaged abdomen. "He insisted on coming," Dante said from the driver's seat, catching her eye in the rearview mirror. "Hasn't slept properly since you went into surgery," Boss said to bring him along. "Hey, buddy," Jade whispered, burying her hands in the dog's thick, coal-black fur. The tension in her shoulders dropped just a fraction. The drive to her neighborhood was a stark study in contrasts. They rolled smoothly out of the polished, wealthy hospital district and descended into the gritty, neglected streets of the South Side. The convoy of armored luxury vehicles looked entirely out of place, rolling past boarded-up storefronts, pawn shops, and flickering streetlights. When they pulled up to her crumbling brick apartment building, Jade's heart sank. She saw Mrs. Gable from 2B peering out from behind her ratty curtains, eyes wide. "I can take it from here," Jade said, her hand on the door handle. "Protocol says we secure the perimeter and walk you to your door, Miss Jenkins," Dante replied, already unbuckling his belt. "Please," Jade pleaded, her voice tightening. "My 17-year-old sister is up there. She thinks I fell off a ladder in the stockroom. If 4 heavily armed men walk into our living room, she's going to have a panic attack." Dante paused, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. He pressed 2 fingers to his earpiece, murmuring something too low for Jade to hear. After a moment, he nodded. "I'll walk you to the door. The rest of the men stay down here. But we are posting 2 guards in the alley, and 2 out front. Non-negotiable." Jade sighed in defeat. Fine. The walk up the 3 flights of stairs was torturous. By the time she reached her peeling green door, she was winded, clutching her side. Dante stood back, blending into the shadows of the dimly lit hallway. Jade unlocked the door and pushed it open. "Lily! I'm home!" Footsteps pounded against the cheap laminate flooring, and Lily rounded the corner from the kitchen. She was a younger, softer version of Jade, with the same unruly brown hair but eyes that hadn't yet been hardened by the world. "Jade?" Lily rushed forward, stopping short when she saw her sister's pale face and the stiff way she held her body. "Oh my God. You look awful." "A ladder did that?" "It was a very tall ladder." Jade lied smoothly, stepping inside and shutting the door, leaving Dante in the hall. She leaned against the wood, exhaling a long, shaky breath. "I just need to sit down." Lily guided her to their faded floral sofa, fussing over her with a glass of water and a blanket. For an hour, Jade pretended everything was normal. She listened to Lily complain about her calculus teacher, Mrs. Albright, and nodded along to gossip about the high school track team. It was the slice of mundane life she had been craving for over a week. But the illusion shattered exactly 62 minutes later. A sharp, metallic rap sounded at the door, not a knock. It sounded like the butt of a gun. Lily froze. "Are we expecting someone?" Before Jade could answer, the door didn't open, it splintered. The deadbolt gave way with a sickening crunch as the door was kicked inward, bouncing violently off the drywall. Two men poured into the tiny living room. They weren't Costello's men. They wore tactical gear, their faces covered by dark ski masks, carrying silenced submachine guns. Lily screamed. Jade lunged forward, ignoring the white-hot agony ripping through her stitches, grabbing her sister and pulling her behind the sofa. "Check the bedroom," one of the masked men barked. Suddenly, the hallway behind them erupted into chaos. A massive, roaring shadow blurred past the doorway. Nero. The cane Corso had been left in the SUV, but somehow, he was here. The dog hit the first masked man with the force of a freight train, driving him to the floor. The man screamed as heavy jaws clamped down on his forearm, the submachine gun clattering across the laminate. Dante appeared in the doorway a microsecond later. He didn't shout, he didn't hesitate. Two silenced, suppressed thwips echoed in the small room, and the second masked man crumpled instantly to the floor, clutching his leg and shoulder. "Clear!" Dante roared into his radio. "We have a breach! Move up! Move up!" Jade pulled Lily tight against her chest, her sister trembling violently, sobbing into Jade's shoulder. Blood was pooling on their cheap living room rug. Dante kicked the weapons away from the groaning intruders and pulled his sidearm, scanning the shattered doorway. He looked back at Jade, his face hardened into stone. "The Petrovs," Dante said grimly. "They didn't come to finish you off, Jade. They came for leverage." He looked pointedly at the terrified teenager clinging to her. "They came to take your sister to get to the boss." A cold, paralyzing dread washed over Jade. The debt of blood Bernard had mentioned, it wasn't just protection. It was a target painted squarely on her back. Heavy, familiar footsteps sounded in the hallway. The remaining guards poured in, securing the windows and the stairwell. And then, parting the sea of armed men, Bernard Costello walked into the ruined apartment. He took in the shattered door, the bleeding hitman on the floor, the growling dog, and finally, Jade and Lily huddled behind the sofa. His jaw clenched so tight, Jade thought his teeth might crack. Bernard unbuttoned his suit jacket, stepping over a groaning hitman without looking down. He knelt in front of Jade, his gray eyes dark and storm-tossed. "I underestimated Viktor Petrov's desperation," Bernard said quietly, his voice dangerously soft. "He knows what you did for Nero. He knows I claimed your protection. Taking you, or your sister, is the ultimate insult to my authority." "You brought this to my home," Jade hissed, tears of anger and pain stinging her eyes. "My sister is safe," Bernard interrupted firmly. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face before falling away. "And she will remain safe, but not here. This place is a compromised box. Dante, get their things, only the essentials." "Where are we going?" Lily asked, her voice squeaking with terror. Bernard stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked down at them with an expression of absolute, terrifying resolve. "You are coming home with me." The Costello estate was not a house. It was a compound, nestled on 30 acres of heavily wooded land along the North Shore. It was surrounded by 10-foot-high wrought iron fences, laced with state-of-the-art security sensors. As the convoy passed through the massive steel gates, Jade felt the heavy, definitive thud of a vault closing. The main residence was a sprawling, 3-story stone mansion that looked like it had been plucked from the French countryside and dropped into Illinois. It was beautiful, imposing, and entirely alien to Jade. "Welcome to the Lion's Den," Dante muttered as he opened the door for her. The next 48 hours were a blur of surreal luxury and suffocating paranoia. Jade and Lily were given a suite of rooms on the second floor that were larger than their entire Southside apartment. The beds were massive, the linens smelled of lavender, and the walk-in closets had been hastily stocked with expensive, comfortable clothing in their sizes. Lily, resilient as only a teenager could be, adapted with alarming speed. Once she realized the scary men in suits were actually there to make her 5-star meals and let her watch movies in a private theater, her terror shifted into a bizarre kind of awe. Jade, however, felt like she was suffocating. She wasn't allowed to leave the second floor without an escort. Her phone had been confiscated and replaced with a heavily encrypted device that only had 3 numbers programmed into it: Bernard, Dante, and the estate's private doctor. She was a bird in a cage, even if the bars were made of gold. On her third night at the estate, insomnia drove her out of her room. The mansion was eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the distant, rhythmic pacing of guards patrolling the grounds outside. Wearing a silk robe she had found in the closet, she crept down the sweeping mahogany staircase, careful not to pull at her healing abdomen. She found the library. It was a massive room lined with thousands of leather-bound volumes, smelling of old paper, rich tobacco, and wood smoke. A fire crackled in the massive hearth. Sitting in a high-backed leather wing chair, nursing a glass of amber liquid, was Bernard Costello. Nero was asleep at his feet. "You shouldn't be wandering the halls, Jade," Bernard said, not turning his head. Jade froze, her bare feet sinking into the Persian rug. "I couldn't sleep. The silence here. It's too loud." Bernard turned slightly, gesturing to the chair opposite his. "Sit." It wasn't a request. Jade slowly walked over and lowered herself into the chair. Nero cracked one amber eye open, thumped his heavy tail twice on the floor, and went back to sleep. "How is your sister?" Bernard asked, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Eating her weight in truffles and watching Netflix on a screen the size of my old apartment," Jade said dryly. "She thinks we're in some twisted billionaire retreat. She doesn't understand the reality." "And do you?" Bernard's piercing gray eyes locked onto hers. "I know, but I'm a hostage," Jade said, lifting her chin, refusing to shrink back. "A very well-fed, comfortable hostage, but a hostage nonetheless. You didn't bring me here just to protect me. You brought me here because my dying in that apartment would have made you look weak to the Petrovs." Bernard didn't deny it. He set his glass down on a side table with a soft clink. "You are exceptionally blunt, Miss Jenkins. I don't have the luxury of sugarcoating things, Mr. Costello. I'm a waitress. 2 weeks ago, my biggest problem was covering rent. Now, I have bullet holes in my living room and an international crime syndicate hunting me. So, excuse me if I skip the pleasantries." Bernard leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring intently at her. The flickering firelight danced across the sharp planes of his face. "Viktor Petrov is an animal," Bernard said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "He doesn't play by the old rules. There used to be honor in this life. Families, civilians, children, they were off limits. Petrov changed that when he ordered the hit on my uncle 3 months ago. He changed it again when he sent Ricky Silva to butcher Nero to make a point." "So why me?" Jade asked, her voice softening slightly. "Why go to all this trouble for a stranger?" "Because of this," Bernard said, gesturing to the massive dog snoring softly between them. "In my world, loyalty is bought, traded, and broken daily. Every man smiling at me is calculating how much my head is worth. But a dog is pure. Nero is the last gift my father gave me before he died." Jade looked down at the cane corso, finally understanding the depth of the Mafia boss's attachment. It wasn't just a pet. It was an anchor to a man he had lost. "You stepped between a blade and my last piece of family," Bernard continued softly. "You, who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. That level of reckless, selfless courage doesn't exist in my world, Jade. I protect what is mine, and by bleeding for him, you bound yourself to my protection." He stood up, walking over to a heavy oak desk near the window. He picked up a thick manila folder and tossed it onto the coffee table between them. "But you are right to be angry," Bernard said, "because the situation is worse than I initially told you." Jade stared at the folder, her heart picking up a frantic rhythm. "What is that?" "Crime scene photos from your diner," Bernard said grimly, "and surveillance footage we pulled from the alleyway. Ricky Silva didn't just walk into O'Malley's by chance. Nero didn't run there by chance. The drop-off where Nero was ambushed. Only 3 people in my entire organization knew the location." Jade's breath caught in her throat. "You have a mole." "A rat," Bernard corrected, his jaw tight. "Someone high up in my ranks sold the location to the Petrovs. They wanted Nero dead to humiliate me, yes. But they also wanted the ledger attached to his collar." Jade blinked. "Ledger?" All he had was a collar. A custom collar, with a hidden compartment containing a micro SD card holding the financial routing numbers for my offshore accounts, Bernard explained. Ricky Silva was sent to cut the dog's head off and take the collar. You interrupted that. But I didn't take anything, Jade protested. The collar was still on him when the paramedics arrived. I know, Bernard said. My men secured the collar at the hospital. But the Petrovs don't know that. Victor Petrov believes you have the drive, or that you know where Ricky hid it before he fled. That's why they sent a retrieval team to your apartment, not an execution squad. They need you alive to talk. Jade felt the blood drain from her face. She wasn't just a point of pride in a mob war. She was a perceived loose end in a multi-million-dollar heist. Bernard, a voice broke through the heavy silence. Jade jumped. A man was standing in the doorway of the library. He was older, perhaps in his late 40s, wearing a tailored navy suit. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and he wore a heavy gold signet ring on his right hand. Jade hadn't met him yet. Gabriel, Bernard acknowledged, his posture stiffening slightly. I told you I wasn't to be disturbed. Gabriel, Bernard's underboss, stepped into the room, his eyes flicking dismissively over Jade in her robe before settling on his boss. Forgive the intrusion, Dom, but we just got word from the docks. The Petrovs are moving a massive shipment of hardware tonight. It's retaliation for the men we killed at the girl's apartment. We need to hit them before they distribute. Bernard's expression hardened. Gather the captains. We strike at 0300. Gabriel nodded. Understood. He turned to leave, but paused, looking back at Jade. Make sure she stays out of sight. The men are getting restless. Harboring a civilian who brought the Petrovs to our door is bad for morale. Jade shrank back into the leather chair, feeling the hostility radiating from the underboss in waves. I give the orders, Gabriel, Bernard said, his voice quiet but echoing with undeniable authority. Miss Jenkins is a guest of this house. Remind the men of that. Vigorously. Gabriel's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course, boss. As the older man turned and walked out, his hand rested momentarily on the doorframe. The firelight caught the heavy gold signet ring on his finger. It depicted a serpent eating its own tail. Jade froze. Her breath hitched. The memory slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. The diner. The smell of copper blood. Ricky Silva standing over her, laughing. When Ricky had raised his hand to strike the dog, his jacket sleeve had ridden up. He wasn't wearing a ring, but he had a fresh, jagged tattoo on his inner wrist. A serpent eating its own tail. Jade looked up at Bernard, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at the door where Gabriel had just exited. The realization was cold, terrifying, and absolute. The rat wasn't some low-level foot soldier. It was the second most powerful man in the Costello family, and he had just looked her right in the eyes. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind Gabriel, but the chilling resonance of his presence lingered in the library. Jade's breath came in short, shallow gasps. Her hands, resting on the arms of the leather chair, were trembling so violently they shook the heavy furniture. Bernard noticed immediately. The cold, authoritative mask he wore for his underboss vanished, replaced by a sharp, focused concern. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, crouching beside her chair. Jade, look at me, Bernard commanded, his voice a low, steady anchor in her rising panic. You're safe here. What just happened? His ring, Jade choked out, her wide eyes locked onto Bernard's gray ones. Gabriel's ring. Bernard's brow furrowed. It's a family signet. He's worn it for 20 years. What about it? The symbol, Jade insisted, her voice dropping to an urgent, terrified whisper. A snake eating its own tail. When Ricky Silva attacked me, when he raised the knife to stab Nero, his jacket sleeve slid up. He had a fresh tattoo on his inner wrist. It was the exact same symbol, Bernard. Exact. The silence that followed was absolute. The crackling of the fire in the hearth suddenly sounded like roaring thunder. Bernard didn't move. He didn't blink. But Jade saw the terrifying, glacial shift in his eyes. It was the look of a man rearranging the entire architecture of his reality. In the Mafia, an underboss was more than a second in command. He was a brother, a confidant, the man who guarded your back when the rest of the world wanted a knife in it. Gabriel had been Bernard's father's most trusted captain. Are you absolutely certain? Bernard asked, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. That unnatural calm frightened Jade more than anger would have. I remember everything about that night, Jade said firmly. the initial shock giving way to resolve. I remember the smell of the grease, the sound of the rain, and the black ink on Ricky Silva's wrist. The serpent, it's Gabriel. He's the rat. He gave them the drop-off location. He wanted the ledger. And now. Her eyes widened as the realization hit them both simultaneously. The docks. Jade breathed. The strike at 0300. Bernard stood up slowly. It's not a strike. It's an ambush. He turned away from her, pacing toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark estate grounds. Gabriel told the captains to gather. He is positioning my most loyal men and me in a choke point at Pier 44. Viktor Petrov will have an army waiting. They'll wipe out the entire Costello leadership in one night, and Gabriel will take the throne as a puppet boss for the Russians. Bernard slammed his fist against the mahogany window frame. The glass shuddered violently. Nero, sensing the explosive tension, woke up fully, letting out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the floorboards. "What are you going to do?" Jade asked, clutching her robe tightly around her. "You have to call it off. Tell your men." "No," Bernard said, turning back to her. A cold, predatory smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was the smile of a kingpin who had just been handed the winning hand. "If I call it off, Gabriel knows he's been made. He'll scatter, take half the family's assets, and start a civil war that will bleed this city dry. We don't cancel the strike, Jade. We reverse it." He walked over to his desk, pulling open a heavy drawer, and withdrew a sleek, matte black satellite phone. "Dante," Bernard said into the receiver, his tone clipping with military precision. "Change of plans. Code Black. Gather the inner circle, only the men who were with me in Palermo 5 years ago. Bypass Gabriel completely. Tell them to equip for heavy assault. We are going to the docks early." He listened for a moment, then added, "And Dante? Prepare the vault. I need Jade and Lily secured. Now." 10 minutes later, the mansion was a hive of silent, lethal activity. Men in dark tactical gear moved through the halls like shadows. Dante appeared in the library, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a stone-cold intensity. "Miss Jenkins," Dante said, gesturing toward the hidden doorway behind the library's bookshelves, which now stood open to reveal a reinforced steel elevator. "Time to go underground." Bernard walked over to Jade. He reached out, his warm, calloused hand gently cupping her jaw. It was an incredibly intimate gesture for a man preparing for war. "You did it again," Bernard said softly, his gray eyes burning into hers. "You saved me again." "Just come back," Jade whispered, surprised by the desperate truth in her own words. She hated his world, but the thought of this man bleeding out on a cold concrete dock made her chest ache. "Don't let Gabriel win. He dug his own grave the moment he put a target on your back," Bernard promised. "Stay with Nero." Jade stepped into the elevator. As the steel doors slid shut, the last thing she saw was Bernard Costello racking the slide of a matte black sidearm, stepping out to meet his betrayer. Pier 44 was a desolate stretch of decaying concrete and rusted shipping containers on the edge of Lake Michigan. At 2:45 a.m., a freezing fog rolled off the black water, swallowing the sodium lights that buzzed faintly overhead. Gabriel stood near the edge of the pier, checking his platinum Rolex. He was flanked by 10 men he believed were loyal only to him. In the shadows of the adjacent warehouse, Viktor Petrov's heavily armed mercenaries lay in wait. Their thermal scopes trained on the entrance. The trap was set perfectly. All Bernard had to do was walk into the kill zone. Headlights pierced the fog. 3 black Escalades rolled onto the pier in a tight V formation, tires crunching over broken glass. They came to a halt 20 yards from Gabriel. The doors opened, but the men who stepped out weren't the standard foot soldiers Gabriel had expected. It was Dante, leading a dozen of Bernard's most ruthless, battle-hardened loyalists. They didn't fan out defensively. They immediately took aggressive flanking positions behind the armored engine blocks of the SUVs. Gabriel frowned, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. The rear door of the lead vehicle opened, and Bernard Costello stepped out. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit. He wore a black tactical vest over a dark sweater, an assault rifle hanging casually from a sling across his chest. "Dom," Gabriel called out, forcing a tight, confident smile. "You're late. The Petrov shipment is in Warehouse 3. We move on your signal." Bernard walked forward slowly, his boots echoing hollowly on the wet concrete. He stopped 10 paces from his underboss. He didn't look at Warehouse 3. He looked directly into Gabriel's eyes. "It's a cold night for a betrayal, Gabriel," Bernard said, his voice carrying easily over the sound of the lapping water. Gabriel's smile faltered, but he held his ground. "I don't know what you're talking about, boss. We need to hit them before Victor's snipers in the rafters take my head off?" Bernard interrupted smoothly. "Or before you take the ledger from my cold, dead hands and hand over the Southside territories?" Gabriel's face went entirely slack. The color drained from his cheeks. He instinctively took a half step back, his hand dropping toward the weapon at his hip. "Don't," Bernard warned, his voice a lethal whip crack. Around them, Gabriel's 10 men suddenly found Dante's loyalists aiming directly at their heads. It wasn't a standoff, it was a checkmate. "How?" Gabriel breathed, realizing he was entirely surrounded. "How did you know?" Bernard raised his left hand, tapping his own inner wrist. A snake eating its own tail. "You got sloppy, Gabriel. You hired street trash like Ricky Silva, and you let him wear your mark. You underestimated a waitress from the South Side, and that is why you are going to die on this pier." Gabriel's eyes darted wildly toward the warehouse. "Victor! Now!" he screamed. The warehouse doors blew open, but the heavy machine gun fire didn't come. Instead, a series of muffled, suppressed gunshots echoed from the roof and the catwalks inside. Moments later, 2 bodies belonging to Petrov's snipers were unceremoniously thrown from the third-story window, crashing onto the pavement. Bernard's elite vanguard team had been on the dock since midnight, systematically neutralizing the Russian ambush before Gabriel even arrived. Gabriel pulled his gun, but he was entirely too slow. Bernard didn't even raise his rifle. Dante fired a single, deafening shot from his sidearm. The bullet shattered Gabriel's kneecap. The underboss screamed, collapsing to the wet concrete, dropping his weapon. His 10 men instantly raised their hands, dropping to their knees in surrender. Bernard walked over to the writhing man who had been a second father to him. He looked down at the gold signet ring on Gabriel's hand. 20 years of loyalty, Bernard said quietly, thrown away for a bigger piece of the pie. Petrov is going to slaughter you, Gabriel hissed through the pain, clutching his shattered leg. "You can't win a war against the Russians, Dom." "I don't have to," Bernard replied coldly, "because I have their shipping routes, their bank accounts, and after tonight, I have their blood." Bernard drew his sidearm, pointing it directly at Gabriel's chest. "This is for Nero, and this is for Jade." 2 shots rang out across the water. The harbor fell silent. By the time the armored convoy rolled back through the iron gates of the Costello estate, the eastern horizon was bleeding, a bruised, vibrant purple. Down in the subterranean panic room, Jade sat huddled on a plush sofa, Lily asleep against her side. Nero was pacing the length of the steel-reinforced room, his heavy paws entirely silent. Suddenly, the dog stopped, his ears pinning forward. He let out a sharp, happy bark, his tail wagging frantically. The heavy locking mechanisms of the vault door clicked in rapid succession. The heavy steel swung outward. Bernard stood in the doorway. He was covered in soot, and there was a streak of dried blood across his cheek, but his gray eyes were bright and alive. Jade stood up, carefully untangling herself from Lily. She walked toward him, her heart doing a frantic, fluttering dance in her chest. She stopped just inches from him, taking in the harsh, violent reality of the man in front of her. "It's over," Bernard said softly, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Gabriel is dead. The Petrovs are crippled. You and your sister are safe." Jade reached up, her thumb gently wiping the streak of blood from his cheekbone. Bernard closed his eyes at her touch, leaning into her palm like a man who had been starving for warmth his entire life. "I told you I just wanted to go home," Jade whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Bernard opened his eyes, looking down at her with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. He reached down, lacing his fingers through hers, pulling her gently against his chest. Nero pressed his heavy body against their legs, leaning his weight into them. "You are home, Jade," Bernard said, his voice a deep, resonant vow. "You bled for my family. Now, you are my family. No one will ever touch you again." And as the first rays of morning sunlight filtered down into the bunker, Jade Jenkins, the waitress who saved a Mafia kingpin's dog, knew she would never pour another cup of diner coffee again. In the gritty underworld of Chicago, Legends are usually written in blood and whispered in dark alleys. But the story of the waitress and the cane corso became something entirely different, a modern, untouchable myth. O'Malley's Diner on the south side still stands, but you'll never see a broken window or a shakedown artist near its doors. It is quietly funded and fiercely protected by unseen benefactors. Jade Jenkins didn't just survive 5 stab wounds. She became the undisputed matriarch of the Costello Syndicate. She proved that the most dangerous force in a mob war isn't the man with the biggest gun, but the fierce, unrelenting courage of a woman who refuses to let the innocent suffer. Today, Bernard Costello rules his empire with an iron fist, but everyone in the city knows, you don't look at his wife and you never touch his dog.